That clock says 10:30, so we will honor that clock. Thank you, Alan. I was just telling Alan Vonville that this is the first time that Alan and I have been in a place where we're doing a little bit of a tag team. And so it's it kind of tugged at me a bit there telling Alan that hey, wow, this is a first. And hopefully something we can do more and more together. Hey, session 2, the new culture and challenges of childhood. So we looked at the changed landscape of parenthood. Now we want to think a bit about the new culture and prevailing challenges of childhood. So I want to see if you can help again. The landscape of parenting has changed dramatically, but have parents also changed in ways that may not be helpful? If so, how so? I said I'm going to ask you that question because I'll get in trouble if I answer it, right? So I'm going to hear from you first. That way I can blame it on you. Like, if the landscape of parenthood has changed, I'm raising the question, well, what about parents? Have parents changed? What have you observed? What are some of the things that you see in parenting today? Any thoughts? That's a challenging question.
More friends than they want to be parents.
Okay. Yeah, perhaps be more of their friend, their buddy, than their parent. Somebody else, how would you say that parenting has changed?
Well, we've talked about so much family time together. I think sometimes now parents are passing on their children to other people because of their lifestyle, busyness, whatever. So it's a babysitter or a grandparent or a daycare who's shaping their child maybe more than parents are.
Wow, yeah, it seems like, okay, we're looking to people and institutions outside of the family to shaping them perhaps more than our own investment of ourselves. Yes, okay, we're going to speak to that here in a moment. Yes.
Just trying to make your kids active in everything, 2 or 3 sports or, dance and everything. It just keeps people running away from the home
And we just said in last session, test question, faith begins at home. And we've already heard this theme of children being active in so many things. So we need to take a look at that. Hey, last call. Somebody got one you want to share? Yes, back here.
I think technology affects us as well.
Yes. Technology is a huge challenge today, and perhaps an opportunity as well, but definitely has changed that landscape of parenthood today. Well, I think I've heard enough from you to share with you a few of mine, okay? So I like William Doherty. He wrote a book called Take Back Your Kids, and he describes several approaches to parenting today that aren't particularly helpful, and so let me share those with you. And the idea is, can we learn something that will benefit us and help us? He describes today's times as what he calls the consumer culture of childhood. In the new culture of childhood, children are viewed as consumers of parental services, and parents are viewed as providers of parental services and brokers of community services for children. Let's just pause there. He's saying parents have come to view children as consumers of parental services, and we as parents, we are not only providers of providers of parental services, but we're brokers of community services for children. It's like the soccer mom in her vehicle who's taking the children around to all these activities where she is brokering these community services and activities. He says what gets lost is the other side of the human equation. Children bearing, watch this, responsibilities to their families and communities. He goes on to say, in a balanced world, children are expected not only to receive from adults, but also to actively contribute to the world around them, to help care for the young and the infirmed, and to add their own marks to the quality of family life, and to contribute to the common good in their school and communities. And I have highlighted these words, consumer, contributor. That's the question. Is it equitable? Or is it balanced? He says in a balanced world, children would not only consume, but they would make a vital contribution to family, church, and community. And we were talking about some of this during the break. And I was suggesting to you that if we're not careful, listen to me, if we are not careful as a church, we may very well mirror the consumer culture of childhood by providing mostly goods and services to our youth. I mean, I'm a real advocate of youth ministry. I'm director of the Cloverdale Center for Youth and Family. So yes, I'm a real believer in youth ministry. But if we are not careful, we will structure and think about youth ministry as just another means of providing goods and services to our children. And the youth minister plans all kinds of activities and keeps our children what? Busy, right? And even in the way we think about youth ministry, we think of it as children as consumers. And I challenge the students we are training to broaden their view and see youth ministry as a place where our youth need to be contributors. Watch this. Failing to expect youth to make a contribution to the body of Christ is a major reason they have a weak connection to the church and leave the church in their 20s. The statistics show that from 70 to 80% of youth these days will leave the community of faith, the body of Christ, in their 20s. And it speaks to a weak connection between the youth and the church. And I'm suggesting to you perhaps one of the reasons there's a weak connection is we also approach our ministry to children viewing them as consumers primarily. And so part of what we want to do is look, as we go through our conversation this weekend, is look for opportunities where children will be contributors to family, church, and community, and not just consumers. Matter of fact, I might just go ahead and speak to that just briefly. It has occurred to me, why would I as a parent, as stressed as I am, as busy as I am, right, in life, I got a job, I've got all these tasks, why would I do anything maintaining a household that my child is capable of doing? I can point to you to loved ones of mine. I'm thinking of one in particular with 3 or 4 children, and mother has a day job, and she's as stressed as she can be, and guess what? She's washing, doing laundry, folding laundry, preparing meals, and it occurs to me, well, what if you look to your children to do what you're doing? It would be good for them to do it, and it would be helpful to you. But it's part of this view of parent as being a provider. and children are there to be consumers. Doherty goes on and describes a second approach to parenting today that he doesn't find particularly helpful. He calls it the therapeutic culture of parenthood. Now, I don't know how much you know about the Therapeutic Alliance. Like, I'm a therapist, and so the therapist-client relationship is sort of tenuous, isn't it? It's sort of fragile. And as a therapist, sometimes I'm afraid of upsetting the client. I might be afraid of challenging the client. Why? Because it's a tenuous, fragile relationship. They may not come back next week. And Doherty is saying, hey, we sort of take that approach sometimes as parents with our children. See, as a therapist, I'm about protecting my clients' feelings. I don't want to be too hard on them. And it's important to be sensitive to your child's feelings, but that's not the point he's making at the moment. Listen to this story. He says, however, the therapeutic model becomes distorted when applied outside the therapy context. I remember a scene at a large facility for emotionally disturbed children and adolescents. A group of preteen boys had climbed on the hood of a car containing several child psychotherapists. The driver got out of her car and gently asked the boys to get off the vehicle so she could proceed on her trip. When they did not move, she looked flustered but stayed with her therapeutic demeanor, saying, I don't know what this is about, but I need you to get off my car now. By now, the kids were really enjoying themselves. Then along came a child care staff member, someone who lived with the children and thus had to manage their unruly behavior. She barked, get off that car this instant. The boys were gone in a flash. After that, I've never forgotten that the therapeutic stance belongs in just one place, the therapy session, not in parenting. What is he trying to say? In what ways do you observe parents being afraid to address unacceptable behavior in their children? Anybody got any that you would point to out there where, I observe and those parents just seem like they're afraid to deal with that? Can anybody give me a good example of that?
For a unruly child that was unruly in kindergarten and unruly in first grade, and I was a second grade teacher, and I just told her right up front what I was going to do, and she said, that's the reason I want him in here.
Okay.
She had just turned over her whole authority as a parent to me to do the parenting.
Yes, she was looking for you to be the heavy. She wasn't willing to be the heavy, but she saw it in you. And there's times when you just need to be willing to be the heavy. Last call, is there anything you see going out there in parenting where it just seems like the parents are afraid to speak up? And
in my career at the store, I would see huge differences between the 4-year-old that was going crazy with their parents and they didn't know what to do and they were afraid to, versus parents that either did something right there on the spot or took them off to the restroom or out the store. There's a huge difference, range of, but a lot of times it was just try to pacify and it did not work.
yeah,
It just got worse.
absolutely. Hey, I don't want to get on a tangent here, and I won't surprise my son by making this statement, but where I see it like the poster child of parents that won't stand up to their children? The poster child to me is the fashion industry these days. What our children are wearing. And it's like I see it all over. I'll see these parents, and I will see, especially with daughters, that there is no way you can tell me that that's modest apparel.
Is there a soapbox
Yeah, I can get on my soapbox, but I'm not going to do that, but I am being serious. I literally saw a parent when I was at ACU walking through the atrium, had what appeared to be two daughters. They were literally trying to pull their shorts down just a tad, and it's like, that father's not willing to say anything to them. Okay, I won't get on my soapbox, but I do want to be clear what Doherty's trying to say. He's not saying you're not sensitive to your child's feelings. He is saying it's a view of children as fragile and we must protect their feelings. It's the idea of promoting their individuality. They are a unique flower, and therefore we do not expect social conformity or conformity to the group. And they do tend to acquiesce that I cannot control, influence teen behavior. So he is not saying, that's not the point he's made. He's not saying don't be sensitive to their emotions and their feelings, absolutely. But he is saying we've got too many parents that promote the individuality of their child and protect the individual feelings of their child and expect less in terms of social conformity and what is important to the group. All right. Let's see if we can give some examples of that. The new culture of childhood. He makes this list, and you might be able to speak up and give me some examples as we go through this. But when I read this list, I'm like, that sounds so true to me, to parenting today. Listen to this. We no longer want our children to grow up in fear of our anger, but we now live in fear of theirs. We know when to explain ourselves and negotiate with our children, but not when to cut off further discussion. We support our child's right to express their ire and frustration, but don't know when they cross the line into disrespect. Does this sound like anything you've experienced? He goes on to say, we are expert in finding community activities for our children to participate in, but don't know when to say enough. We are willing to bend our family time to fit our children's schedules, but are hesitant to limit their schedules for the sake of the family. And we are better at knowing what to buy our children than what to deny them. Hey, does that sound like real world to you? I don't know about you, but that seems real world. I'm like, yeah, I've struggled with some of those kinds of questions. I might, while I'm on this slide, note to you that the Barner Report, 2016 State of Youth Ministry, indicated how busy our youth are these days, and guess what? It said parents were one of the main reasons they were so busy. When you think of things like extracurricular activities and sports, does extracurricular activities and sports trump family commitments and relationships? I remember when I was a teenager, I was playing what they called pony league ball. I think it was like 15, 16-year-olds. That was the beginning of sports on Wednesday night, was when I was that age. And I can remember my coach looking at me and said, yes, Wages, we have talked about this, and we need to know whether you're going to play ball or go to church. That was my last day of baseball. Didn't go back. And it wasn't my parents' decision. I made that decision. Like, hey, family commitments, church commitments. We have allowed extracurricular activities to hijack our family schedules and such. Does the fashion industry determine what you're... Yeah, okay, I've already spoken to that. Number 7, we are better at helping our children make their own decisions, but are confused about when we should make decisions for them. We are more involved in our children's sports activities, but we have lost the balance between home life and kids' outside activities. I guess a question to be asked here is, hey, do you allow your child to play sports year-round? And I respect your decision. But to play sports year-round, I will suggest this to you. I have had multiple students, one of which said, my parents blessed me by saying no to year-round sports. Another one, at a different place of spiritual maturity, looked back and said to me in a journal, my parents sacrificed my spiritual growth by allowing me to play travel ball. Or, you with me? And I guess I should add to that, I have heard parents who now look back on it and say, we realized that was a mistake. Letting our child pursue every activity, play sports. We'll say more about this later. We earnestly desire to meet our children's needs, but often can't separate their needs from their desires. Isn't that true? Isn't that a great list of just how we struggle with parental guidance and influence these days? So my encouragement to you here at the moment is to ask yourselves, do we view children as primarily consumers rather than contributors? Do we esteem individuality over their social conformity? Hey, let me talk to you a bit about some of the current challenges that you are facing as parents. The Barna research alluded to 2016, the State of Youth Ministry. They identified 8 major challenges for child rearing today. They were focused on youth ministry, but it certainly applies to parents. What we're seeing today is a rising Bible skepticism. Our young people today are increasingly skeptical of the Bible, which many consider to be irrelevant. Which means that in our strategies for parenting, we need approaches that will show them how God's teaching and words are relevant to their lives today. They found increasing loneliness. This one seems to puzzle me. During a time of our youth being hyper-connected by social media and such, they are far more likely to report, listen to this, I'm lonely, anxious, and depressed. Yes, the current cohort that's super connected by social media still feels lonely, anxious, and connect. Perhaps it's because social media is a place where you can present yourself to people how you want to be viewed, and nobody really knows you. Perhaps that's what's happening there. Number 3 and 4, pervasive pornography, confusion regarding human sexuality, and you can understand that our youth are terribly confused about issues of sexuality and gender, which are right here before them everywhere they turn these days. And I'm going to suggest to you the church has been woefully silent on the subject. And I'll be a little bolder and say the church has been woefully silent on the subject to the point of neglect. If there's anybody that should have a healthy, positive message about human intimacy and sexuality, it should be the church. Yes, sir?
Yeah, it goes beyond like what is right and wrong behavior, right? Does the church really need to communicate that? It's more of addressing what's underneath.
Yes, absolutely. How do I honor God with my body? How do I embrace holiness through sexual attitudes and behaviors and such. It goes beyond the do's and the don't message. But they're terribly confused, and we need to do more to help them. Number 5, a me-first morality. The idea that our youth are increasingly egocentric. Within our culture, we value what I would call expressive individualism. And so we see the emergence of a new moral code that places self at the center of their lives. They don't. This would be the opposite of them seeing themselves as part of a bigger picture. It's all about me and my story. And as a matter of fact, I'll give credit to Alan here. I like the way he talks to his children. Do you want to be a big part of a small story, your story, or do you want to be a small part of a really big story? Is the way I've heard him language that. Well, the me first morality is, hey, I am a big part of a very small story, my story. Pressurized Christian identity goes with number 8 very well. Conversation challenged disciples. Our youth are afraid to speak up about their faith in the face of enormous peer pressure. Look, as disciples of Christ, what are we asking of them? What are we trying to shape within them? We are calling them to make countercultural commitments. Isn't that what we're asking them to do? And so numbers 6 and 8 are saying they have a difficult time among their peers and such expressing their faith and being able to answer for their faith, explaining why God's way is a better way on some things. And certainly, I would suggest to you that they face a growing hostility towards Christianity. I mean, there's a time when non-believers tolerated Christians, but we now live in a time when non-Christians are outright hostile towards Christianity, and that's our young people as well. Number 7, an era defined by achievement. Teens are excessively busy and preoccupied with building their resume and such. They're busy people, probably too busy. And I must admit, maybe we've raised them to be like us, because we're pretty busy too, probably too busy. So what I'd like to do is spend some time here with what I call begin with the end in mind. You know, you do these parenting seminars and it's like, okay, what is it we're trying to achieve? And so I would at least like to be able to give you conceptually a picture of what it is, where you're trying. Alan a moment ago, didn't he say, hey, we're trying to get here. It's not just about the do's and don'ts, right behavior and wrong behavior. It's like, okay, where are we trying to take them? How many of you, I would suggest you would probably agree with this statement. If I said something to you like, hey, it's your responsibility to make a path in life for your child, most of you would probably disagree with that. Most of you would probably say something like, it's my responsibility to equip them to make a path for themselves. That's a different way of thinking about parenting, right? To equip them to make their own path in life. What's the end game? And I love this this picture. If you don't know where you're going, you will probably end up somewhere else. Isn't that good? Isn't that true about parenting? If you don't know where you're going, you're likely to end up somewhere else. So I want to try to take a few minutes and say, okay, here's how I think about where you're going. And we won't have time to chase all of these at this moment. We're introducing them for further conversation. But let me share with you several ways of thinking about where you're going. in that Barna report, here's what they found as they listened to parents and youth. What was it that they were pursuing? And so in their report, they said, okay, what we heard from parents and from youth was, I should maintain a high GPA. Let me read it the way it's stated. Maintain a high GPA so they can get into college, the college of their choice. Graduate near the top of their class to obtain a good college scholarship. Excel in extracurricular activities, athletics, band, etc., and build a strong resume for college admission. Be happy, stay out of trouble, and enjoy their teenage years. Those were messages they heard from parents. And if we were to digest that just a little bit, obviously a lot of that is about, okay, I want you to be able to make a living for yourself one day. College is expensive. Let's do the best you can to build a resume, get some scholarships, right? And for some parents, they're like, I'm just hoping to get them to 18 without them embarrassing the family. That's the fourth one there. Be happy, stay out of trouble. If I can just get you to 18 out of my household without having embarrassed the family, then we're good. And then the last one, possess a personal faith as a believer, seeker, and disciple of Christ. Yes. Yes. That's where we want them to be, is possess a personal faith as a believer, seeker, and disciple of Christ. Hey, Gary Thomas said, what if God designed marriage to make you holy more than to make you happy? I like that. I would suggest to you that God is for happy, but I believe that God is far more concerned with our holiness than our happiness. I would suggest to you that if we're not careful, we will be more concerned about our children's happiness, their success, than their holiness. The central question of parenting is whether you can make a holy life together with your child. And watch this. If you are not careful and clear as parents about where you are going, your children will likely end up somewhere else. Hey, look at that list. The devil, the evil one, will be thrilled if your child attains the first four of those. The evil one won't have any problem if you're able to say, hey, my child has done this, this, this. And there's not anything wrong with the four of those, and don't misunderstand me, in and of themselves, right? But what is tricky is attaining the first four of those without losing sight of the last one. That is especially tricky. Where, okay, I can achieve these things, and you just not be a disciple of Christ. The devil will be thrilled with that. And that's the 70 to 80% I'm talking about that leave their faith in their 20s. Okay, another way to think about beginning with the end in mind is character development and spiritual formation. And so what character traits are you trying to foster within your child? The Josephson Institute has what they call the 6 pillars of character, and I happen to like that model. Responsibility, caring, fairness, respect, trustworthiness, and citizenship. You could add others, couldn't you? Certainly you could. But I like that model and tend to focus on those. Those are character traits. They're values. They're what we value. And I've got a picture of a Bible there next to it to say to you, we could go to Scripture, and I'll show you tomorrow, that you can go to Scripture for every one of those. Can't you? You're right. That's part of spiritual formation as well. And then we would think in terms of adding certain social and life skills. But Alan and I were talking on driving over this morning, and he made, I think he made the point that this, when we talk about character, we're not talking about behaviors that's right and that's wrong. Yes, that's kind of part of it, but that's not the aim. It's not about controlling behavior. Matter of fact, this weekend with you, you won't hear me say anything about consequence controls. That's part of parenting, that you have consequences, but you won't hear me talking about consequence controls. Why? These are values. It's not just a matter of managing their right or wrong behavior. We're talking about instilling values within them, beliefs within them, purposes within them that give direction to their lives and honor God. And so my encouragement is, as parents, we need to shift our thinking from the idea, I'm here to manage your behaviors of right and wrong, to and the idea, I'm here to teach you right and wrong, to something along the lines, I'm here to help you reflect these values. And I like that. I like the using of value language. And Alan was telling me that with my grandchildren, they don't speak the language of right, wrong, good, bad. They speak a language of values, and your behavior is either helpful or unhelpful. If this is the aim, is that we treat one another with fairness, is your current behavior, is that helpful towards becoming people of fairness? See, that's a little different language than good, bad, I approve or I disapprove of you. How does your behavior reflect the values that we are seeking as a family? The book we've already alluded to, Raising Self-Reliant Children in the Self-Indulging World, has perceptions and skills. And watch these. We are trying to foster perceptions of personal capabilities. You want your child to be able to say, I am capable. I am competent. Perceptions of personal significance. I am needed. I am valued. I like this idea. Don't we all want to believe we're worth knowing? It's like, I believe Alan is worth knowing. I wish I could get to know him better. I'd like to think Alan believes Steve is worth knowing. We all do. And that's what they mean by perceptions of personal significance. I am worth knowing. Perceptions of personal control over the environment. This is talking about an internal locus of control, that I have some influence on my environment and what happens to me. I can determine and impact my own future. Strong intrapersonal skills. We'll say more about that in a moment. I'm aware of my own emotions and feelings. And I can exhibit self-control over my emotions. And strong interpersonal skills. I can resolve conflict. I can resolve problems, interpersonal problems, in healthy, appropriate ways. Just look at all the things you hear on the news these days. Don't you wonder, like, where did these children, young people, learn that kind of problem solving? Are you with me? The things that are in the news? And then the last one, strong judgmental skills. I can make decisions. I can explore alternatives. I can make good choices. I can consider the future consequences of my choices today. That's critical thinking. You're trying to foster and develop that within your children. Hey, let me quickly do this last one here. And again, a little time to talk about it, but I'm trying to give you a model. Say, okay, here's what we're trying to do with our children. Social skills, for example. You want to foster self-expressive kinds of behaviors. My child can express their feelings, which means you teach them a feeling vocabulary. They've got to have the words. Matter of fact, another thing Alan and Rachel have always done well is I like the phrase, use your words. I remember with my grandchildren when they were this tall, and maybe they were, upset and crying and acting out or whatever, and they would consistently say, use your words, use your words. They taught them a feeling vocabulary. I can talk about my feelings. I don't have to act them out. And what you see on the news week in and week out are people who are acting out their feelings. They haven't learned to talk about them. Expressing opinions, beliefs, responding to compliments. I can accept someone else complimenting me, and stating positives about self. I see myself in a positive light. Self-expressive behaviors. Look at the next one, other enhancing behaviors. You want to raise your child to be able to state positives about others, to give praises to somebody else, empathizing with others, being able to recognize the emotions and feelings of others, agreeing with others. Try to be agreeable, right? They go on to say assertiveness skills, making requests. I can express what I need. I can ask of you what I would have you to do. A denying request. I can say no to you appropriately. Disagreeing with others. Yeah, I may disagree with you, but I can do that in appropriate ways. Communication skills, conversing skills, just talking. I'd love for you to meet my Alan's 3 children. I'm here to tell you they can talk. They can carry on a conversation. They don't really meet strangers, especially those 2 girls. He's got an older son and 2 girls. Look, those 2 girls. And I'm saying to you, they have a certain confidence in themselves to be able to articulate and carry on a conversation with someone they just met. And part of the reason, one of the things I've seen Alan and Rachel do so well is they ask them a lot of questions. They spend less time directing them, telling them, and they spend more time asking them to articulate, to express themselves. And they're very confident. And so problem-solving skills, conflict and such. And then the last one, emotional intelligence, I like this. It's talking about self-awareness. I can perceive my own emotions. And I have a vocabulary, a language for describing that. Self-control. I can understand my emotions and I can begin to manage my own emotions. I don't maybe do a lot with that in this weekend, but I'm becoming increasingly convinced that is central to parenting, is helping your children learn to properly manage emotions. That's called self-control. And then self-discipline, I like to think of it this way. I can reward and punish myself. See, I have some college students who aren't very self-disciplined. If there's a concert this weekend and they have a big paper that's due on Monday, self-discipline says, if I have it done by Friday, I will reward myself by going to the concert on Saturday. That's self-discipline. Self-discipline says, if I don't have it done by Friday, I will punish myself by giving up the concert on Saturday because I didn't get it done. That is self-discipline, rewards and punishments. Okay, let's see if we can give Alan, I think we've got plenty of time for lunch, so let's let Alan do his primary takeaways and any questions.
All right, any questions? Comments?
Self-discipline, you talked about college kids or younger children, being able to let them fall, being able to let them take their consequences. It's sometimes hard for a parent to do.
Oh, the failure part? Yeah, I wrote that down somewhere. Yeah, in fact, I wrote down, might be a little bit different than how you wrote down, children are fragile and must protect feelings. I think some of what's underneath that is we don't like failure, one. And especially we can be raised in a church culture that like creates the you shouldn't fail, and if you fail, you're bad, right? And that actually breeds shame. Right? We also don't like fail because we may not like the consequences that come to us, right? My child screams, right? Or we don't like the idea of failure, right? Well, how did you learn what was helpful and what was not helpful? Did it all come from your parents? No. It came from your experiences of failing and trying again, right? In fact, that's what Adam and Eve, that's what's going on in the garden when Adam and Eve sin. God says, okay, now you get to learn from your failures what it means to, who I am, what it means to love me, what kind of God I am. It's not just me telling you. Yeah. And communicating that in such a way that you're actually tender with your child's response to failure. I got a 10-year-old still at times doesn't like to lose at games. And when she loses, she either wants to throw something at times, holler at somebody, or she runs off to her room and she's got big emotions, right? There is no win in that situation for me, right? In fact, I can respond to her in such a way that I'm going to lose. I'm going to hurt the relationship, and I'm going to make her feel less than because of the emotions that she has, right? I'm actually trying to train and coach her. How does she respond to failure? And you know what? If you need to cry for 15 minutes, I've got to give enough space in my home and my time that I can allow my child to cry for 15 minutes. That's not the problem, right? What we try to avoid is self-destructive behaviors that lead to addictions, right? Or we try to avoid hurting other people when we're in that highly emotional state, right? Failure is okay. Can I teach you? Can I coach you how to self-soothe? Right? That goes against the I'll give you something to cry about that maybe I heard when I was growing up.
Put him in there, and he would be up, standing at the rails, screaming. And I would go, and I would have about as much as that as I was going to stand. And I hate to admit it, but I was CPA. I used the phrase, if you're going to cry, I'll give you a reason to cry. And somehow I had in my thinking that spanking him would help him go to sleep. Okay, you're going to cry, I'll give you a reason to cry. It's like, that's helpful. I don't think I did much of that, but I was known to have at least said that. So he's right about, yeah.
Yeah.
Related, but on the consumer culture side of things, I wrote down, I don't remember exactly what the phrase all on the slide was, but I remember you said that it's vital for kids to feel like they're making a meaningful contribution by the things that they're doing in the house. And looking back, one thing my parents did very well with me was I did have a lot of responsibilities in the past, but I would also say that I did not necessarily always see those tasks within as a meaningful contribution. So I just wrote down to myself, that's a good reminder to me of wanting to communicate the why those tasks are vital and meaningful for the well-being of the family, not just to make my life more convenient.
Right, and that's what connects the first lesson to what you're saying is today you actually have to be intentional to create that meaning, right? You do this task for the family. Whereas 200 years ago and beyond and still around the world, right, if you lived in a farm or ranch or whatever, right, there were direct consequences that came from it. And so so you knew the meaning behind it. If you didn't go out and plant crops at a certain time or pull the weeds, and right, it was going to have a direct impact, right? Now it's more about creating the meaning around it. Yeah.
That's a great point. You got to be intentional.
And part of that goes back to, like, if you kind of a deep thinker, if you think you have to ask the question, what is the point of childhood? And it's changed today because our economy has changed. The need for children at one time was you needed children to help around the family. You needed children for the survival of the family and your small community that you were in. But today, you don't need children for that. Right? That's changed. And so now we think about childhood differently. Right? Before, you were training to be an adult. And so that you could look after your family and the well-being of your community. But because we don't have that, we train children, we think of childhood as more of like, have all the fun that you can have, because when you're an adult, you're going to have a lot of responsibilities. Have you been there? Right? That's what creates that's the consumer thinking. Do you have something to say?
We have two boys, and we moved away from our biological families when we moved to Columbus some years ago. And one of the things that I've observed was my children, my boys, did not have the luxury of being around cousins, smaller children within the family, and they had no concept about, smaller children, what they were like, playing with them or anything like that. And I thought a good way to do that, to expose them to smaller children, and it was a service to the church too, is we started taking care of the nursery periodically. So they would have experience with small children. Now, the first Sunday we did that, the boys sat over in the corner with their arms folded, and they wasn't going to participate, But as we did it more often, they, warmed up to the idea, and it became a fun thing to do. But it did give them that experience that I didn't, that I had growing up, playing with smaller cousins and all within the family. So
Yeah, even like education, the one-room schoolhouse, older kids were partly teaching younger kids, things like that.
I wasn't in a one-room school.
We're not saying, and make sure, man, this is so important. It's not like we're not going back to a one-room schoolhouse. We're not saying like sell everything you have and go live on a farm, right?
But you should have seen the first Sunday that one of them held one of those babies, one of those little babies. They were like, oh, okay.
So what's really important here too is all right, we've kind of talked about the lifestyle where you may have your kids involved in a lot of sports, and to me it's not you shouldn't have your kids involved in a lot of sports. It's like, but if you think of it in terms of training your children for adulthood, it's how do I even use their participation in sports to give them a mindset, right? What does it mean to be a good teammate for this team? It means I work really hard. It means I show up to practice, right? And then when you come home, son, daughter, you're doing the same thing. You're getting lots and lots and lots and lots of practice. So that as you grow up, and when our family has big things that we need to tend to, right, you're ready to go, right? You practice as hard as you can in your sport so that when it's go time and you play in the actual game, You're ready. Same mindset. You bring the same mindset into your home, right? Hey, you know what? And when they go off to college, if they don't know how to do their clothes, whose responsibility is that, right? It's not yours.
In marriage, I've had some of my daughter-in-laws come back and say, thank you for doing this. And then I've had someone say, well, I had to fill in a little bit. There's a little something you left out. I said, well, good for you.
We got just a couple of minutes. Any other comments? All right, I had one idea that I'll read out, and it's related to achievement. You mentioned something. All right, so give me 3 minutes or 4. So identity. At one time, if we go back to the Bible, ancient cultures, whatnot, identity was something that was given to you. Right? You are a wages. Right? You are Jewish. Right? And today we don't think of identity that way. Postmodern way of thinking about identity, the larger view of society is that you go out and you find your identity. Right? And as a parent, I'm going to be careful with exactly how much I try to influence that, because you're an individual. You need to find your own identity, right? You need to find what satisfies you, and what that can create is this idea that I am what I do, and I base my value then on what I achieve. And if I achieve well, then I've got great value. And if I don't achieve and I fail, then I'm, right? And so we can actually do that in the home if we're not careful. Right? If you make the goal a high GPA, then that means when I don't make that GPA, I have failed. And if I fail, because my goal has been to achieve this GPA, and if I fail and I didn't do that, then I've done something wrong. I've done something bad, which can also lead to I am bad, right? So the goal isn't GPA, the goal is something else. The goal is college, the goal is to do your best, right? And we actually know from research that it's not telling our kids that it's a GPA, like attain this GPA, that does it. It's the habits that are behind, right? How do you have good habits? Or how do I develop a desire for learning and curiosity in my home, right? I want to develop those pieces at the heart. And then from that, you're motivated to do well. Right? So I want to shape the heart. And then I can go back when I see their 6-week grade or whatever, when I see their report card, and they seem to, make grades that were not expected, right? It's not that I go and tell them, you didn't make an A, you didn't do enough, right? I'm actually wanting to coach them in how to understand, okay, you didn't make the grades that you were expecting. What's behind that? What's the habits that need to be changed, right? And we know that when we can get there and teach children that, then that actually helps them be able to think for themselves, what do I need to do in order to learn well? Be successful, right? And then education becomes a tool more so than something to be achieved. Does that make sense? All right, I think we're ready for lunch.
Yes, we are being dismissed to what I